will invite head of the retrial investigation on Zoom, Usenko, head of the Department of Protecting the Interests of Children and Battling the such violence at the General Prosecution Office, Khrystyna, head of the JurFem, PhD in law, and Iryna Pavlyk, coordinator project battling conflict-related violence, UN representation in Ukraine. And so just if everyone on Zoom present, so then we'll start. So it's a very important topic, and we can talk about trust, about shared standards. We'll start by learning what we have. So Yevhenii Kolesnyk is the first to speak, in particular from National Police. How do you shape your approaches of working with the personnel? And then I will ask you some additional questions. Hello, and thank you to the organizers for collecting so many people who are really take care about the victims of violence. I'm not going to dwell on statistics, but as a representative of main investigation unit, it's a highly prioritized work. We do daily monitoring. So latent phenomena. Also, there are some problems, of course, when we investigate this kind of crime. And primarily, it's about determining how systemic is domestic violence in different regions. In one region, they believe that there should be 3 citations over the year to administrative in another region, there might be 3 notification only about the domestic violence is enough. But the Supreme Court already ruled what is systemic domestic violence is when not only the protocol, administrative citation, but a number of evidence and evidence-based data sets that show that it's a systemic phenomenon. Other than other genders being vulnerable, there are also children. So what's the problem in this kind of cases? First of all, we try and limit the interrogation of children to one interview, one session, so that these evidence is admissible in the court. The investigative judge should be engaged to minimize traumatization for a child. Also, in terms of evidence collection regarding the perpetrator, because how domestic violence is happening in family, the neighbors don't want to see it, but we're moving towards that. We are changing our approaches. So what specifically we're trying to do and what we have done already. With the assistance of international organizations, we have started to conduct trainings with investigators and detectives. So we did one in Vinnytsia, Another one we conducted in Western region. When the first training was conducted, we realized that the problem exists not only in the work of the investigators, but in communication itself. Agreeing to work with the social workers, with judges, with procedural staff of the court. So conducting for the second time this training with the Western regions, we invited procedural leaders and from general prosecution and also the judge from the cassation court of the Supreme Court. So we modeled sort of role models of behavior. Like, for instance, we put prosecutor as the investigator as the prosecutor, and as they create so based on this training, some of the officers who were rather skeptical to this kind of crime, the domestic crime, that it's hard to prove, still were convinced that there should be a general approach, and we do have to streamline it, and they agreed to support it. The investigative judges and spreading this experience over to other regions. Plus, our academia have published several guidebooks. Plus, we monitor the facts of notification about domestic violence, so we can identify the facts where it was several citations already, and there were several complaints already, but the perpetrator was not yet brought to justice. So thank you for this detailed description. We can talk about a different plot other than the standard and talk about trust again, because it's been several times that we mentioned trust, and I remember it was in summer, JurFem did study how effective is the response to sexual violence. So, above 78% of those who say that sexual violence victims think that their complaints will be ignored. 28% afraid of their confidentiality. It's a big challenge, and it says really that the lack of trust not only to national police but to law enforcement at all. How does police work with this challenge? I can assure you that the trust has increased the trust towards police, and I can even say that even when they started looking into reasons, like using the restrictive action, only in 1 month of work we increased by 10%, and it's continuing. As I said, we can see in our results that more often people complain to police about the cases of domestic violence than before. So there is positive attitude that they no longer think that police is helpless. Yeah, I remember studies. 3 times they were conducted in Ukraine. The human rights, Ilko Kucherev conducted, and the result was that people who did complain to law enforcement or courts or other institutions, they demonstrated higher level of trust to this because they did work with them already. They knew how they work. So in continuation of our work, let's get Yuliia Usenko to this conversation. She's head of the General Prosecution Office, the unit preventing sexual violence. So yesterday, as the Prosecutor General was speaking, we heard that there is the will towards standardization of approaches with the GBV. So Juliia, maybe you could tell us what kind of approaches they are, how it's happening right now, how will it happen later. Thank you. Thanks everyone. I greet everyone in this conference. I was listening into some panel discussions. It's a very it's a great session to discuss such topics. As for the initiative of the General Prosecution Office, in terms of victim-centered approaches in criminal proceedings and with GBV, over the last couple of years, the General Prosecution Office has been actively implementing these approaches in criminal proceedings related to children. And I think we have succeeded together with our colleagues from different regions, from district prosecution offices, to change these approaches. And that shows us that we can do much more than we can do now and achieve that result of really protecting the interest of the affected people. That's our main mission. And the colleagues from the General Prosecution Office have the approaches that they use when working with victims of armed conflict and war crimes. This is also regarding domestic violence, what our department is doing. So really, the General Prosecution Office, I will allow myself to say it, they take a leading position in this process. And of course, it is only possible with support of our leadership, the General Prosecutor, who constantly say that we have to protect the interests and rights of the affected people. But these processes are not realistic, and they cannot be realistic if we don't interact between each other. We have talked about coordination, and it's a very important element in providing the rights of the affected people. And let me get back to the start of the conference where Andriy Kostyan, the General Prosecutor, made an overview of general approaches that we're moving towards. Let me describe what specifically we mean, what are we working on, and how we see the standardization. But primarily, let me tell you about two parallel processes that we have to be aware of, which is standardization and specialization, because these approaches allow us to focus on specific problem and improve our professional skills to unify these approaches. And secondly is the training in selection of candidates, because no matter how many guidelines or laws we pass, it's the people and the staff that we hire. They are those who apply these standards, and that's the only way to move towards the results. So let's proceed to standards, and I will stress again, getting back to the start of the conference, when and it's not the exhaustive list, of course, but it's general and basic things that we have to do and we have to understand for ourselves, regardless of who we work with investigators, witnesses, prosecutors, social workers, or other experts who are related to this category of offenses. So the first thing is what we have to deal with is the affected person, is the victim. Provide the status in a timely manner. That will determine what rights we can support of them, and so that they are eligible to request assistance. And it's important not only to focus on the affected people, but the environment around those people, because the gender-based violence and domestic violence often it could be children, other family members, when these crimes are committed in the circle of trust. And here we not only have to focus on the applicant, but to look into the situation, to the actual circumstances of the state, and identify further affected people in this process. Secondly is identification and responding. That's where we have to openly talk. Are we capable of providing this one-stop shop or entry point to make sure that the people are reassured that their application will be accepted, that it will be reviewed, that it will probably properly treated, that different details will be taken into account, the literacy level, the emotional level of that person. So that's all the things that we need to facilitate to maintain dignified approach, so that we don't send the person back to the perpetrator, but provide to them the opportunity to protect their rights. So in this process, we can achieve two important levels for us. That's what you were talking about with Yuliia, that we can significantly increase the level of trust to law enforcement. We can increase the level of trust to social services and other facilities that the victims can refer to, and also we can decrease the latent nature of this category of crimes, because we know that concealment and latent nature of gender-based violence is too big, especially when it's about these very vulnerable categories. Thirdly, it's raising awareness about the legal assistance that the person is eligible to, informing them in clear and understandable language. Because we talk about consent, explaining to them how the proceeding is going to happen, what kind of rights they can use, what kind of support they're eligible to when they are in this criminal proceedings. Because we all understand that often the victims write waiver that they don't want to further participate in procedural action. They revoke their testimony because they don't understand what's happened later, what they get from staying or going through these motions, through procedural actions. What do I get from the perpetrator being charged? Because for them, it's not the most important thing. They have to be provided everything necessary to feel safe and not to be afraid for their life, because they cooperate with pre-court investigations. So that's why it's important to provide this information in clear, concise language, with their age in mind, with their maturity in mind, with intellectual literacy, and whether people are at all reading your legal speak, if they read their rights to the person. So it's important to be selective in what kind of terminology you use when you inform the person about the criminal proceedings and about the support they are eligible to, and how to act after they get this kind of support. And fourth, a very important element is the representation of the victim and providing free legal assistance. Of course, we need to think about the law. When is it possible to provide that kind of assistance and guarantee it to the victim? But a big significant victory is already that both children and adults who suffered from domestic violence are eligible for this kind of assistance. Of course, the category can be expanded later. We can work with the non-government organizations, with the legal unions that can provide assistance pro bono if we have them in the community. But that's up to us. How well do we accumulate this information and provide it to the affected persons? If training the people who contact with the affected people, and this should go throughout the whole process of proceedings, when from the very start of informing the person that there is a crime committed against GBV, crime committed against them, and to the completion. And it's about every involved person. So this specialization for the experts should be integrated in their treating and working with the victims depending on the damage done, and so that we really can guarantee that the assistance is provided in a very professional way. Sixth is protecting the victim from potential persecution and revenge. So I want to cite one example, and I think you will understand from there. When we have case of domestic violence committed in some area, then the affected person has maybe the opportunity to relocate to another city or another location. But of course, you all know that it's going to be territorial jurisdiction in the place where the offense was committed. And here it's very important what approaches we use working with the affected people. In my experience, we were sometimes informed that in this kind of situation, that's why I'm bringing you a real example from life, where the victim was forced to come to the populated area where the perpetrator lived, whereas the person had moved to the shelter in a completely different region. What's important here? It's important that the investigator and the prosecutor would plan investigative action, because we might push the person towards secondary victimization, because it can be intimidation from the perpetrator, and it can affect the family members of this perpetrator, because they can be forcing the victim to drop their charges, and the investigative judge should plan for that and plan the interrogation with this affected person, either to limit the territorial jurisdiction where the person is residing, of course, if the jurisdiction allows for investigative action in this territory, or use remote proceedings, but be very balanced in planning your investigative action. It's very important during the pre-court and pre-trial investigation, because when the prosecutor subpoenas witnesses and the victims, perpetrators and the victim, and they all come together in the same corridor, this is another re-traumatization for the victim. Intimidation, pressure from either the perpetrator or their family or their friends. So we need to be aware of that when planning. And it has to happen with the interest of the affected person, not in the interest of the investigator or prosecutor or another subject who has something to do with that. Seventh, and that's very important, and it's the very heart of our standards, is to minimize the procedural action with the victim. As I said in the previous part. It's the planning of investigative action. But there are many situations where the investigators are, there's a significant gap in time when there was an interrogation, and then in 6 months there's expert examination, and then after some time we also do another interrogation. Of course, there can be the need for the secondary interrogation, but it all depends on the planning and clear, understandable deadlines. And that's what the prosecutor is responsible for. And they also have to keep track of these procedural actions to be done in timely and to be effective, so that there is no need for a repeated interrogation of the person. Also, the medical examination is also another important topic, because we often see that medical examination is appointed just for no good reason, and it's been some time has passed, and so we don't do investigative action just for the sake of the action itself. We talk about efficacy and how traumatized is the person through each of such actions, because it may re-traumatize them. And of course, interrogation. Interrogation should happen in a separate room, or at least there should be an atmosphere of trust. If it's a prosecutor or judge. So next, if we talk about cases related to gender-based violence and sexual violence, if there is this opportunity, of course, it may not always be available because you're understaffed, but it's preferable that the interrogation is conducted by the same-sex person. And we're using such principles when we work with children. And maybe you may think that the children are not adults, but we should be equal in our approaches to anyone who's requiring our services. Don't ask questions regarding the private life of a person, regarding insubstantial information that has no value for this particular proceedings. You have to be aware of that, because often it is permissible, but it's not right to be permissible. And of course, the children.
Children are, of course, a vulnerable group, and it's very important to standardize the processes. It's already been done, and colleagues mentioned this pilot project in 6 regions. So in those regions where these projects are implemented, you already know the standards of work. And so I encourage everyone to stick to those standards until all this pilot project is scaled up to the whole country. And my last point, so the one-stop approach, so that is very important, but in order to achieve that, we need coordination. So when we talk about providing the full range of all assistance and services, social services, medical services, and legal services, we need to engage all the institutions and agencies that can provide these services. And we've discussed it on the previous panel. that there are many services which are provided by state institutions, NGOs, and it's very important to put it all together into one sustainable system so that we can open the door to survivors when we can. And when we talk about coordination, coordination is not just enough to know your mandate. Coordination, it means that we need to know which person does what so that we can refer timely and correctly and communicate with colleagues from other institutions and agencies that yes, now we did the follow-up, we are providing assistance to this particular survivor. And I have a suggestion. We had a meeting of the working group, and we discussed that it's very important that on every regional and local level, it's important to collect all spectrum of services that can be provided to a survivor. Representative of education, healthcare, police, prosecution, social services. So this list has to be unified, and each representative of every system should provide the list of the services which are available on this level. And it's important to know that it's not just giving a leaflet with a list. It means that we need to refer this person correctly to our colleagues. It's important not to lose this person. It's not enough just to give a postcard with a list of services available, because the victim will go back to the offender and will be in this vicious circle. They can leave this only if we show that we can provide absolute support. And of course, it's very important to cooperate with civil society organizations, because we are not competitors, we are all working for the same beneficiary, and we need to protect our survivors. And I encourage everyone present in this room to coordinate locally, that we've been talking so much about this, and everybody mentioned that we don't have enough coordination on local levels. But I can address our prosecutors because we have prosecutors from all over the country on regional level, and I encourage you to use these coordinating tools. And if you see if coordination doesn't work in your region or in your municipality, in your district, so use these coordination tools that you can support and keep it up, because this coordination works on the central level, and I'm sure that you can manage to do that on local levels as well, so that we all can do our main task, which is to protect survivors. Thank you. Thank you very much. I see a round of applause. You can actually make some noise. It's okay. So thank you very much, Yuliia, for this really detailed description. And you mentioned quite a few times of about civil society. Now we are going to listen to Khrystyna, who represents JurFem. And I think we just can continue talking about standardization of approaches, and maybe you can talk more about international standards, and then we'll just proceed. Thank you very much. Thank you, Iryna, and I want to thank Yuliia, because Yuliia outlined those aspects which are about standardization of approaches in GBV, which includes sexual violence, domestic violence, and other types of crime. And everything that Yuliia highlighted in her speech, that's where we can see international standards as well. And we stated these standards in your agenda. You can follow the QR code on your agenda to find the list of standards. These are standards of the EU in 2012. These are minimal standards, which every country which is or is going to be the member of the EU, and so that's where Ukraine is moving forward to. And here we start with a gender-sensitive approach and attitude. So that's what Yuliia mentioned, that we need to decrease the number of interviews for victims, because the more interviews we have, the higher chances are that we will lose our victims. They refuse to cooperate with the justice system because they feel under pressure, that they need keep coming back to the police department and answer the same questions over and over again. And also this directive, and Yuliia said that it's not just enough to use green rooms for underage victims. We need to think about all victims of GBV, and based on the evaluation of trauma and their needs, we need to use the green rooms if necessary. Of course, we need to have individual approach depending on the crime and depending on the trauma of the victim. About confidentiality, so we have a very clear description in international standards. We discussed it yesterday and today, that it's not only about a victim living in a small community, and they don't want all neighbors to know that this happened to them. In big cities, it is maybe easier to regulate, but in any case, we need to think how we can guarantee confidentiality. And it is about professional ethics of people who have access to the information. And when we talk about registry of cases of domestic violence, the question of confidentiality is an issue. That's one of the reasons why we don't have this registry, because we don't know how we can guarantee confidentiality if we have the registry. Another aspect of supporting victims, one of the basic international standards from this directive, it feels that it's not our mandate, because our mandate is to investigate. But here it is stated that we need to provide services and support, and it feels like additional burden. And we have limited personnel, we have lots of different duties, and it sounds scary and complicated what to do with GBV. But to be honest, those colleagues who have effective coordination with civil society organization, with social services which provide services to survivors of GBV, they can say that it simplified their work, because when they meet the basic needs of a victim, and after stabilizing their mental state, having provided them shelter and everything that they need, then it is much easier to communicate with a victim and to establish contact and to continue the criminal proceeding. Because a victim this way feels that they are a person, they are treated in humane way, and without meeting the basic needs of the person, we cannot achieve this. So again, coordination is very important to achieve this. Sometimes on some territories of Ukraine, in today's context, we cannot meet all the needs, and not all institutions are represented in some territories of Ukraine based on the situation now, but this is something that we need to take into account because, of course, we can prepare unified standards, but we do need to think about liberated territories because unified standards might not work on these territories. And another aspect that I would like to highlight, that's an aspect of communication. Yuliia talked about communication with victims of GBV, but I would like to talk about communication with society as well, because as you can see, Iryna asked about trust of victims towards law enforcement and justice system, and some research shows that those who had this direct contact, the level of trust is higher than those who never experienced this communication, which means that we don't talk enough about our human-centered approaches. It means that we rarely show our humane face to general public. And when I studied at university or our School of Police, we were never taught to communicate with people properly. We were taught to document, to interpret laws or investigate, but we were never taught how to talk. But we do need to learn this because we can have wonderful legislation and perfect conditions, but nobody will ever know about that. And people who are suffering from domestic violence or GBV, they will never know that we are able to work and help. And so that is very important to share information about our new approaches in our work. And we need to inform general public that it is important to support and help every survivor of GBV or domestic violence. And today we saw a wonderful video from Chernihiv region, how they organized this information campaign so that people can know more. Another aspect that I would like to talk about, of course, standards will not work if we don't learn how to use them in practice. Yes, some aspects are connected with amendments to legislation, but if we talk about legislation for domestic violence, we have good laws and we have mechanisms that allow us to work. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We have aspects about the reducing the number of interviews, about and we have some, we can maybe change some norms and regulations, but at the same time, we can implement and form those European approaches which are already described in directives of the EU and which Yuliia talked about. So I believe that our next step after this conference will be to clearly define these standards, describing clear recommendations, but maybe using some international standards, but adjusted to our context. We as civil society organization, we understand well that any standards will work only if people who are supposed to use them will use them and will be ready to implement them. And that was the purpose of this conference, so that we discuss them, to give you the floor, and so that we can come up with the standards that will be useful for all of us in our day-to-day work and beneficial for the victims. I have an additional question. How should the standards look? Like, is it a law? Is it the document, a paper? I believe, yes, it is some kind of a document. I think it's more the question to Yuliia and to Prosecutor General's office, but what we as civil society organization ready to do, we can cooperate with Prosecutor General's office, with National Police, and with support of international organization, including UN Women. We are ready to prepare this unified document, and we are ready to organize public consultation with all stakeholders. But then, of course, then it's like a more official offices can say what type of document it will be as a final result. So then I'm asking Yuliia, so what is this document? What kind of document is that? So I'm a dummy, I don't know, maybe everybody in the room knows the answer. I think that I can state that it is a document, a common document. It's better to give it official status. And I think that we cannot just base it on goodwill, because the country is big and we have many stakeholders. So for that reason, we need an official document which will make it sustainable. So we already have this practice when we talked about standards for children. We can use the same approach, or we can find another way, and we can create this document, and the key officers will sign this document, and all the algorithm and standards will be described in these documents if we talk about criminal proceedings, and so that we can use this document in our work. We also, when we train our personnel, we can refer to this document, and it should be publicly open so that any member of society can familiarize themselves with these standards and approaches. Because it's important for people to know that if they come to any member of justice system for protection, that they will be protected. And and not only protected, but also supported with different services. So definitely it has to be a document, even though in some countries sometimes it's kind of internal document where all agencies just agree on, but I support the approach of an officially signed document by the heads of all key agencies and institutions, so that we can use it in practice. Thank you very much. Let's continue, and I'm giving the floor to Iryna Pavlyk. And I think you all know that now it's a time of 16 days of combating violence, and when we talk about GBV and Ukrainian context. So my first question to you is the way that Ukraine has come. If we talk about standard approaches and we discuss all these documents, I remember my first conferences on gender issue, for example, in 2012. That was not the level of this conversation, and I could not even imagine that we in 2012 we could have conference like this with these type of stakeholders. So how do you see the way that Ukraine has covered? Yes, you are right. It's wonderful that we have so many representatives of law enforcement, prosecution, and it's been a long way. You are right. And a lot has been done. We have had a lot of success stories, but we still have a lot to do. And I really want to thank each and every one of you for your input, for being here on behalf of UN Women, for coming here, for sharing your ideas, your experiences, and for inspiring us. And of course, I want to thank our reliable partner, JurFem. Thank you very much for organizing this incredible event. It's wonderful. Thank you. And we are always happy to support initiatives that Ms. Yuliia Usenko mentioned, that Khrystyna mentioned, and it was very important for us to get the request from Prosecutor General's office to develop this document for prosecutors who work in pre-trial on domestic violence and GBV, because it's very important to remember that, first of all, I would like to say, when we talk about domestic violence and GBV, we need to remember that the majority of victims are women. We know that. And I would like to say that when a woman makes a decision to ask for help, for protection, when they decide to call the police, come to a civil society organization, it already means that she has a long experience of abuse and violence. It's never an easy decision, and when she makes this decision, she has a certain level of trust that she can be helped. And it's very important not to lose this trust when they have their first contact with the police, prosecution, or any other agency or institution which can provide her legal protection. And as Iryna, our wonderful moderator, mentioned, that we still have issues with trust of survivors to the system of justice and law enforcement. And it's very important not to lose what we have, and it's very important to develop this level of trust. How we can do it? I think that we need to work this bilateral or two-way communication. We need to work with women, with general population, as women are usually victims of this type of violence. I would like to provide some statistics. The UN, so 24 agencies of UN which work now in Ukraine, about 3,600,000 people in Ukraine. They require protection, access to justice, and services around domestic violence and GBV. And 90% of these 3,600,000, these are women. So when we talk about GBV, domestic violence, we need to keep in mind that we talk about mostly women. And so women need to be engaged in all processes of decision-making process at every stage, whether this is national, regional, local level. We talked a lot about coordination today, and it is very important because one organization alone, whether it's international organization or state institution, so they cannot fight alone, because it exists on structural level. This violence and discrimination is structured. So unfortunately, that's what we experience starting from kindergarten, school, or university, and at work. All around, we hear about the proper role of a woman in society, some gender norms, gender stereotypes, and each of us has certain gender stereotypes that don't allow us to stop this violence towards women. And for that reason, women and women organizations, they need to be engaged on every stage of forming policies. They need to be included into the councils. they need women and women organizations. They need to be part of advisory boards, advisory institutions, and these should be women who are or were survivors of domestic violence, of GBV, those women who have experience, and they can inform and they can help to build these gender-sensitive approaches and gender-sensitive system of criminal justice, because criminal justice has to have humane face. So, to a certain extent, women's face, and to achieve that, women need to be involved. We need to consult with women all the time. We have up to 150 women organizations that we consult with all the time. And this information, this participation of women is very important for forming our policies and the support that we provide. And I believe that when conferences, trainings, or some meetings, if they engage more women, if survivors of GBV and domestic violence are invited to events like this, if they find strength to speak up, to become public, to create organizations that. So we support the organizations of women, and many of them, they work with violence against women.
So all those associations that affected women has formed, their participation is critically important, specifically to build trust in the society, trust towards law enforcement and justice, and that violence against women can really be dealt with, and we will indeed work with zero tolerance towards any gender discrimination or violence against women. So, second idea that can facilitate strengthening trust and improving the more inclusive, more gender sensitivity is work with law enforcement, police, prosecution, and courts, so that they know the law, first of all, because it sometimes happened, also in my experience. I was a case manager for several years. I was working with women who suffer from domestic violence. So sometimes you could see that not all law enforcers really knew their laws. Sometimes there was a situation where I would say something, and lawyers from our partner organization would say, and the colleagues from the law enforcers, "Are you sure? Well, let me Google this law." So to avoid this kind of situation, we need to have proper training, and the letter of law and the policies on all levels should be present. And I'm very happy that we have people from the regions, we have local authorities, because they often work with the affected people, and all those policies and legislation. We have powerful legislation, very victim-oriented legislation regarding the battling the domestic violence, but it has to work locally. Support through trainings, through training products and sessions, from online to offline, using multidisciplinary approach when there's not just one agency present, but the whole interagency interaction, especially in access to justice, because no structure will deal with this problem alone. It's very important to coordinate training, sensitization, and the training has to start maybe not necessarily with the law, law is very important, but basic things like gender stereotypes, because we're all grown up in Ukrainian society, which is still largely patriarchal. And it has some serious gender bias and discrimination towards women and violence against women and the place of women in the society, you know. And so let me answer to the question of Iryna. 16 days campaign against violence that started on November 25th, the International Day of dealing with violence regarding women and girls. So this campaign ends December 10, International Human Rights Day. So for 16 days, which also has a lot of important dates. Women who fight for human rights, but the start of November 25th, International Day of dealing with violence against women, and up until the international campaign, 16 days on November 10th, it says that it's all about human rights. The women or no women, it's about human rights. And the rights, women have the same rights as men and don't have to be discriminated against through their gender, and they don't have to suffer from violence. Often these gender bias exists in nature, in the society, that mostly it's women who might have some low social status, or they may abuse alcohol, so be vulnerable, and many women can suffer from gender-based violence, and we try to engage to our consultancy and support different women. So 2 weeks ago, I was in Carpathian. I was doing some focus group and individual meetings with the Roma women. So let me tell you that the level of marginalization, discrimination that Roma women in Ukraine suffer from, it's really significant. And I was talking to more than 30 Roma women in Transcarpathian. None of them basically applied to the police because they are afraid to apply for the police. They are afraid of stereotypes and bias, and that leaves them without protection. We also one Roma organization, Romani Zbor, they're based in Odessa, and the head of that organization is this incredible Roma woman, Zhuna Dobochava. So they did this small study this summer in Odessa. So they have a lot of Roma, and it's a study among 500 Roma women who live in Odessa. So the studies show that 95% of Roma women suffer from domestic violence or different forms of gender-based violence. So to sum up, the UN Women, from November 25th, we launched a media campaign because, spreading information about the violence regarding women and breaking the stereotypes that it's only socially protected women suffer from that, it's so important to fight it. We can see it on our pages and social networks and Twitter and Facebook, and it's a campaign this year. It's called No, You Can't, where we asked 16 Ukrainian ladies, public Ukrainian women, who they publish every day their stories. They tell their stories of violence, and it's successful, famous women who often are well off. They're well supported, but they they suffered different forms of domestic violence, and we want to communicate these stories. We want to communicate that violence towards women, as well as domestic violence, is about everyone, Nobody is completely protected if we don't work on it, and being informed about what can happen, it also a sort of protection, because if you are informed, you are armed. And also they tell their stories, how they applied for assistance, and it's also awareness about services that support women and girls who suffer from gender-based violence. Thanks a lot. Thank you. We can suggest to everyone asking your questions if you want. That's the moment to do it. I know there are some colleagues with the microphone. If you have questions, please wave your hand. No questions? I then will ask Khrystyna to say a few things. What JurFem or our community will take with you after this conference as maybe an action plan. As an action plan, I think Yuliia has told us how we move. So on one, from our side, it's obvious it's the assistant in preparing the standards and training the experts in investigating gender-based violence. It's something we work on, and we'll continue doing that with great joy. And we thank the Office of General Prosecutor and Ministry of Internal for this initiative to move in that direction. It's not the NGOs coming and telling us let's do something, but it's the governmental agencies. This is the demand, this is the request, and that's what we can do. And I think our country is strong, regardless of where we work, the NGO or governmental. We can pursue our shared goal, and it's about our resilience. How we, regardless of the external circumstances, we try and create safe space for all of us. So that's around the future plans. As for the conclusions from our work today and tomorrow, today and yesterday, I think each of us in this room are people that work and understand what a human-centric approach means, how important it is to support the victims of GBV and their needs, and I have no doubt about it. So we as adults, it's hard for us to take something new. Of course, we have a great experience in working, and we need to use new approaches. So, considering your answers, your questions, I understand that we gathered here in the right time, in the right place, and it's now it's on us to make the criminal justice more humane. I have no doubt that the standards will work, that it will be implemented and will work, help in our work. But there is also a second important thing that we talked about today. It's how important we are as experts who work in the system with the complex cases, including cases of GBV. We may have wonderful legislation and great approaches, but it's important to remember people who live in the system, their mental state, their health, and their resources. So it's your resource to work with such great number of cases. And it's also the task that has to be in the to-do list for all the structures, whether national police or general prosecutor, because it's important that the people who work in the system feel themselves safe, needed, and protected, and capable designing the approaches we're working on. The National Prosecutor, National Police, they have they continue the work on maintaining mental health of their experts, and it's important to support them. So I wish us all great strength and perseverance, that we're polishing and and improving, and of course not forget that we alone will never deal with these challenges, because the challenges are numerous. So it's coordination, it's mutual support, and at least not forgetting to request assistance. There will be always people capable to help you, and will be able to protect people in their rights against gender-based violence. Thank you, the General Prosecutor Office and the Department of Protecting Children. I thank you, Yuliia, Iryna, and all the colleagues who help us organize this. Of course, the National Police, the Ministry of Internal, UN Women, and the wonderful team of the JurFem who organized this all for us, organized the safe space, and all the moderators and speakers for great work, great moderation, for being able to hear important ideas of everyone here, and everybody who found the opportunity to come to our joint conference and agree on the next plans. Thank you. That's a great place for applause.